I have a problem. I love Miles Morales, but I wasn't really collecting Marvel Legends when the Space Venom wave came out. Now, that version of Miles is way too expensive. I love the video game version that came out last year, but my collection's mostly comic book style, and he looks just a bit too realistic. I also love Into the Spider-Verse, but he looks just a bit too cartoonish. That brings me to this all-new basic version. My question? Can I fudge this Miles into my comic book style Marvel Legends Spider-Man display? Make like a wall crawler and stick around. Welcome to 5 Points of Articulation, where I review action figures and then articulate 5 points to help you decide if you want to add that figure to your collection. The 5 points I discuss are packaging, presentation, posability, playability, and price. I'm Jason, and if you enjoy my content, please like, share, subscribe, do all the YouTube rigmarole. Starting with the packaging, and it's one of those newfangled plastic-free boxes, seal of approval in the corner, Marvel Spider-Man logo in the center along with Miles Morales versus Carnage, nice kinda cartoony looking picture of Miles in one corner, and a picture of Carnage in the other corner that should almost count as false advertising. Product shots on the back. Miles can be seen here wielding his giant bazooka, and just in case this is your very first toy, here's how it works. The firework is a particularly nice touch. That accessory is in its own special box in the middle of the package. All joking aside, I think for a kid's toy, this box is fine. It's bright and colorful, and again, it shows you what you're getting. Though, depending on your point of view, that might not be a good thing. For packaging, I'm giving Miles vs. Carnage 1 whole point. Moving on to presentation, and both figures stand at just under 5.5 inches. Keep that number in mind, because it's going to be important later. Also, since I'm less interested in this figure, I'm going to start with Carnage. In the last segment, I criticized it for not looking like the picture on the box. The thing is, this isn't based on the comic book Carnage. This is based on Carnage from the Ultimate Spider-Man animated series. Looking from the body down, and honestly, I don't know that I would recognize this as Carnage. I mean, he does have pointy-ish fingers, and there are some swirls of black against the red, but honestly, there's just not enough of it. The hands look too much like gloves, the waist looks too much like a belt, the pattern is too symmetrical, and the feet look like slip-on shoes. Not surprisingly, that paint detailing didn't really make its way around the back. You will, however, notice this hole. That's to accommodate this bundle of symbiotic tendrils. Nice bit of detailing in there, considering they didn't really have to. There is also some texture at the tips. It plugs in like so, and does complete the look. I do appreciate that they sculpted in some of these details. It would have been just as easy to take a blank body and paint some squiggles on it, but they did go the extra mile. And honestly, paint job aside, I don't hate this head. As a Carnage for kids goes, I think it's fine. Then again, I grew up with this Carnage, and they didn't seem to feel any need to make him child safe. It's also worth noting that on the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon, at least the one I watched, this is actually not Cletus Cassidy. In that episode, Carnage was actually Peter Parker, infected by the Green Goblin. Whether that's still the case or the way it's supposed to be for this 2-pack, I honestly cannot say. And speaking of Spider-Man, that brings us to Miles himself. If all you saw was this angle, you might think that this was a Marvel Legend. From the top, and the eyes have been sculpted on, and all the red detail has been tampoed on very neatly. Putting them side by side my Pizza Spidey, and at a glance I think it's fine. In fact, the reds even match. Also, I should probably point out that this is the retro card reissue of Pizza Spidey and not the original release. Either way, the two things that are going to throw it off for most of you are the articulation and the height. Now remember when I told you to remember that this figure was 5.5 inches tall? Currently, Comic Book Miles is listed as being 5 feet 8 inches. That would place him being a bit closer to the PlayStation version. As we can see, however, there is a bit of a discrepancy. Ultimate Peter Parker was listed as being 5'5", but Hasbro used the same body. In 1/12 scale, 5.5 feet would be 5.5 inches. Into the Spider-Verse listed Miles as being 5'2", and you know what? These figures are the exact same size. So depending on your preferred canon, this size is just right. To my eye, Miles Morales looks spot on, and while I don't think that this Carnage looks good, it does at least look like the cartoon upon which it was based. For presentation, I'm giving Miles vs. Carnage 1 whole point. Moving on to posability, and this should be brief. Starting with Carnage, and he has 6 points of articulation. From the top, and he has a ball joint in his head. He can look up and down a little, small amount of tilt, and all the way around. Moving on down, and he has swivel shoulders and T-style swivel hips. They kick this far forward, and also a little bit back. Lastly, Carnage has his tendrils, which you can turn to reposition. Moving on to Miles, and he is in no way, shape, or form comparable to a Marvel Legend, but he is a lot better than Carnage. From the top, and he also has a ball-jointed head. He can look up this much, and down that much. Little bit of tilt, and all the way around.
Unlike Carnage, Miles has swivel hinge shoulders that raise up 90 degrees. He also has swivel elbows. So not only can they flex, but they can also move side to side. Nothing in the wrist, unfortunately, and also nothing in the torso. Like Carnage, and he has T-style swivel hips. They kick out this far, and also a fair amount back. Also unlike Carnage, Miles has single-jointed swivel knees. Sadly, he has no ankle articulation. This Miles Morales is light years ahead of the Across the Spider-Verse figures that we looked at a couple of videos ago. The Carnage is pretty consistent, but the inclusion of swivel hinge knees makes a world of difference for Miles. Even so, for posability, I'm giving this set half a point. Before we continue, just a quick reminder that I'm giving away an Iron Spider to one lucky subscriber. Deadline to enter is September 16th, 2022. More about that at the end of the video. Moving on to playability, and the 2-pack comes with this missile launcher. We got some tech detail on the top and some web detail on the side. Nothing terribly fancy about the missile. It slides in here and clicks into place, and Miles holds it like so. Surprisingly, he can actually stand up while holding it. To shoot Carnage, we just apply some force back here, and... ooh! But playability is more than just spring-loaded accessories. It's also about how well your figure plays with others. First, some Cletus Cassidy comparisons, and here's the very first Carnage ever made. This one was from Toy Biz in 1994. Here's one from 1997, also by Toy Biz. This one was from 2003 and was part of Toy Biz's Spider-Man Classics line. For my favorite Carnage, and the one I've been using in my collection, here we have Marvel Select. This is a 7-inch scale series, but even by that standard, it is pretty tall. But most recently, I picked up this Absolute Carnage from the Venom Pool Wave, found him in box at a toy show for only 20 bucks. And for one more fun little comparison, here he is with the Bonnie to his Clyde Shriek. First, some Spider-Man side-by-sides, and here we have Into the Spider-Verse. Again, they're the same height, but the newer Miles has more compatible proportions. And speaking of the Spider-Verse, here's the Across the Spider-Verse basic assortment we looked at a couple of videos ago. Here we have the Gamerverse version. If you saw my top 10 Marvel Legends of 2021, you'd know that he was one of my favorite figures last year. For a Peter Parker comparison, and here we have the retro card. The painted online work really pulls it together. That said, for a bit of fun, here's an older Toy Biz figure. Here he is with a couple of different versions of Ben Reilly. Big rivalry between the two in the comics right now. Here he is with Spider-Man 2099 for a couple of Spider-Man allies, and here he is with the Black Cat. This was the original Hasbro version, and here he is with Spider-Gwen. This is the Into the Spider-Verse version. As you can see, they're about the same height, with Gwen being just a bit taller because of her hood. And here he is among all the Spider people. Spidey happy people. For some villains, and here we have his uncle, the Prowler. This is probably one of the most important comparisons we could make. For some other villains, and here we have Dr. Octopus. Here we have the retro card Electro. Here's a retro card Sandman. Here's a retro card Green Goblin. I'm sensing a theme. And lastly, for retro cards, here he is with the animated series style Venom. But for my favorite Venom, here he is with Marvel Select. On the subject of symbiotes, and here he is with a Venom Pool Wave Carnage. But of course, we can't have Miles without the Kingpin. For a relative scale comparison, here they are with Pizza Spidey and Spectacular Spider-Man. And as always, here they are with Stealth Iron Man. Whether or not you mix and match these figures with the rest of your collection, this set is a lot of fun all on its own. For playability, I'm giving Miles vs. Carnage 1 whole point. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price. I found this 2-pack at Target for $21.99. 2 whole figures for less than a Marvel Legend. So then, what about my original question? Can this Miles substitute as a Marvel Legends? If all you want is a comic-style Miles Morales to stand on your shelf and look cool, I think it'll work just fine. Obviously, you won't get the same kind of dynamic poses you would from a Marvel Legend, but he's still a lot of fun. And for price, I'm giving Miles vs. Carnage 1 whole point for a grand total of 4.5 out of 5. To find out more about the Iron Spider giveaway and to enter, click here, or to look at my review of the Across the Spider-Verse Basic Wave, click here. Where do you land on this Miles? Would you fudge him into your legend shelf? Sound off in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again real soon, but until then, play nice and have fun.